And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. On the last couple podcasts, we were looking at what happens when one curve shifts, and there were four possible things that can happen, and we went through all four of those. Now we're going to look at what happens when two curves shift. So now we have two things that are going to be changing at one time, and we have to record both of those on the graph, and it's going to get a little bit more confusing. So let's just kind of jump right into it. And remember here, all we're doing are the mechanics of this. Okay, we're really not getting into the intuition of supply and demand right now. We're just doing the mechanics of when two curves shift. So let's go ahead and do it. Let's jump into this first one. Increase demand. Okay, demand, that means the demand curve is shifting. And remember, increase means it's going to the right. So we just come down here and record that. Demand curve shifts to the right. That's an increase in demand, and we call that new curve demand curve D2. On the supply side, we have a decrease in supply. Supply means the supply curve is shifting. Decrease means that it's going to the left. Remember, not up and down. Curves don't shift up and down. They shift right and left. So decrease means left. So the supply curve shifts into the left. There's S2, and then we find the new equilibrium. The new equilibrium is going to be where the new demand curve intersects the new supply curve, and then we go ahead and label. So our new price is going to be P2. So the price is clearly going up, but now look at the quantity. This is where things get confusing. A lot of people would say, oh, well, the quantity stayed the same, right? Right there it is. The quantity stayed the same. But maybe not. Let me back that up, because maybe quantity didn't stay the same. That is to say this. What if the demand curve, and I'm going to erase this here in a second, but what if the demand curve had shifted all the way out to here? That would still be an increase in demand and a decrease in supply. And then the new equilibrium would be right there. And then you could say, oh, quantity went up. Okay? Or, let's get rid of that. Or, maybe you could say this. Maybe you could say the demand curve shifted to here. And that would still be an increase in demand. It's a little tiny increase, but still an increase. The demand curve went to the right. So then that would now be the new demand curve, and our intersection point would be right here. And then you could say, oh man, quantity went down. So you see, really, it depends where the demand, how far the demand curve shifts. So let's get rid of that again. So how far did the demand curve shift? Well, I didn't tell you that. All I told you was that there was an increase in demand. I didn't tell you how far the demand curve shifted. So what we're going to say about quantity is this. We're going to say that quantity is indeterminate. That means we cannot determine what happens to quantity, whether it increases or decreases. So let's record the four things that can happen, the four things that did happen. We got an increase in demand. That meant the demand curve shifted to the right. We don't know how far it went to the right. And then we had a decrease in supply. That was the supply curve shifted to the left. We have an increase in price. And then finally, we're going to say quantity is indeterminate. I'm just going to use a question mark to indicate that. Quantity is indeterminate. That means I really don't know whether quantity is going to go up or down. It depends on the magnitude of these shifts. How far does demand shift? How far does supply shift? Now, no matter what, price is going to go up. But quantity, it's going to be indeterminate. Okay? And you really just need to practice drawing that and playing with it a little bit until you get it. And it's a really important concept, and you're going to deal with it on quizzes, and you're going to deal with it on tests. So you really got to pay attention to it. All right? And you'll get it after you do a couple. All right, let's do it again over here. Here now we get a decrease in demand, increase supply. Two curves shift. Decrease demand. Demand, shift left. So let's record it. Demand goes to the left. D2. And then we get an increase in supply. Supply goes right. So supply is going to, let's just straighten that out a little bit. Supply curve is going to shift to the right. It's going to shift to the right to S2. And then we mark our new equilibrium point. The new equilibrium point is going to be right here. The price is going to go down, but what about the quantity? Well, the quantity again is going to be indeterminate. The way I drew it, it looks like maybe it went down just a little bit the way I drew it, but I didn't tell you the magnitude, so we really don't know that for sure. The demand curve, a left shift could have been to here, a left shift could have been to here, and that would change where the quantity was, and that starts to get a little bit confusing. And we'll do some more videos on this later, but for now, let's just say quantity is indeterminate. We cannot determine what happens to it. So whenever we get a decrease in demand, that was a left shift, an increase in supply, that was a right shift in the supply curve, we are always going to get a lower price, and the quantity will be indeterminate. We will not be able to tell what happens to the quantity. The real key is just following what that equilibrium point does. Like you can see it definitely goes down, decreased price. Over here you can see it definitely goes up, increased price. And then quantity is indeterminate. Okay, so that's what happens when the demand and supply curve shift in the opposite direction. One increased and one decreased. They went in the opposite direction. On the next video, we'll look at what happens when they shift in the same direction. We'll take a look at that on the next video. Thanks for joining me. This has been Mr. Hagan. See you on the next podcast.